Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. It's nice to see visitors. So, when I come to preach here for the last few months, I've been doing a series of sermons on Revelation. It's a survey. It's not an in-depth study. So, I'll do a little bit of review so you can see where we are and where we're going. If you're interested around this picture, this is a picture taken from the island of Patmos in the Mediterranean in the Aegean Sea, where John wrote the Revelation. Clicker on, button pushed. Okay, so I put this in every slide because I want to make sure everybody hears this. This book was meant to be understood. It says it's prophesying about things that are about to take place in chapter 1, and then again at the end of the book in chapter 22. It says these things are shortly to take place. Now, there's room for disagreement on what the book is teaching because the book was written in kind of code. I hate to say code, and I say that every time I talk about it, but it's written for people who understood a language and a culture, people who had understood what the Old Testament had to say. They understood pop culture. And so there's references in the book that we don't necessarily understand because we weren't there back then. Uh, so there is room for disagreement. And I will be the first to tell you, I don't have all the answers. And if we disagree on something, it could be that I'm wrong. Um, this book is in really three major sections. In the first few lessons I taught were things that were that happened on the earth. There were all of these, the trumpets would sound or the seals were open and all these things that were happening on the earth. And now we're going to turn to a new section in chapter 12 that talks about signs that are appearing in heaven. So what John's saying is that there are things that happen on the earth and there are things that are happening on heaven. Now, all of these things have a symbolic nature to them. Like we talked about, that there's really not going to be locusts that come down and sting people. It's a sign. And we talked about what that sign meant because that sign was a sign that they had heard about before. People talked about locusts back then and they understood what that meant. And I had to like put up a picture, like, what's a locust? We don't have locusts in Seattle, but of course I used to live in Idaho out on a farm and we had big grasshoppers, locusts. We knew what they were. Okay, so this week we're going to start talking about the seven signs in heaven. And what that really means is we're going to tell you what the signs are. We're going to read a little bit of the scripture, and I just want to like dip the toe in the water to understand there is, if you read the Old Testament and you look at other parts of the Bible, you can figure out what these crazy symbols are talking about. Because we're going to read something and we're going to be like, what in the world is he talking about? All of you, being good Bible students, are going to say, yeah, that leans back in such and such in the Old Testament. It talked about that, so I know what he's talking about. But a lot of people today, they don't read their Bible, and so they read this, and then some guy will come up here, and he'll say it means such and such, and they'll be like, "Whoa, that's super scary." What I'm going to do is I'm hopefully going to do is say, look at this. This is what it says. And if we look at these references in the Old Testament, doesn't that make a whole lot of sense that that's what he's talking about? Since that symbol is something that was used in the Old Testament. And I hope it'll at least maybe immunize you against crazy things that other people have said. And again, I could be mistaken. So if you have questions or want to discuss this, I'm happy to discuss this afterwards or at some other time. Okay, so let's read some chapter 12. And we're not going to read everything, but I would like to read some of it so you get a taste of what I'm talking about here. And the first thing I'm going to emphasize is it says a great sign appeared in heaven. A sign, a symbol. It's not like this was what was actually happened. This is a vision of things. And it's a message that we're supposed to, or the people that were the book was written to, the seven churches of Asia, were supposed to understand what this stuff meant. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems. And his tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven and threw them down to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule over the nations with a rod of iron. and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there should be nourished for 1,260 days. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his and his angels waged war with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Let's skip down to verse 13. And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time and times and half time from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth and after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened his mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. So the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children, who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of God. Wow, what in the world does all of that mean? That is just crazy stuff. So let's just break it down, and we'll start with the easy one. Who is the great red dragon? Well, it tells us. Verse 9 tells us the great red dragon is the devil. It says, so from now on in the book of Revelation, when we see the great red dragon, it's talking about the devil. So devil, Satan, the serpent, all refer to the same thing. Of course, we can go all the way back to Genesis and see the devil appeared as a serpent. Devil means accuser, and Satan means adversary. We can go to the book of Job and see that in Job, Satan was an adversary. So from here on out, we know what the great red dragon is. We don't have to be confused. We don't have to worry about it, because now, great red dragon is a symbol for Satan. Okay. So who's the child? I'm taking these in the easy to harder order, because it helps when you can get the easy ones out of the way to figure out what the other ones are. Well, the child was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. Okay, well, who was that? Who's the child who rules all nations with a rod of iron? Well, we can go back and look at Psalms, and we can see that same thing. You are my son, today I have begotten you, in verse 7. And in verse 9, you shall break them with the rod of iron. And just a couple of chapters ago, back in chapter 2 of Revelation, the message to the church at Thyatira said, and he shall rule them with the rod of iron, as the vessel of the potter are broken to pieces, as I also have received authority from my Father. Well, who was given that message to the church in Thyatira? And of course, who went to heaven to a throne? Well, it's Jesus. Whenever you hear about ruling with a rod of iron, those are prophecies about Jesus. So when you see a child in Revelation ruling with a rod of iron, that's Jesus. When Jesus was a baby, did some evil guy try to kill Jesus, maybe? Who do you think Herod was working for? He was working for the devil, of course. So now we get to this woman. I'm sorry I have to go fast, but I'm like, you guys don't want to be here for 2 or 3 hours, so I'm going to speak fast, and you can play it back slow if you want later on. Who's the woman with the child? Well, she's clothed with the sun, moon under her feet. She's crowned with 12 stars, and she gives birth to a child. And we figured out that the child was Jesus. Her children keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Well, who are the people who hold the testimony of Jesus? Well, those are Christians. So who is this lady? Well, now, if we go back to Genesis, we'll remember that Joseph had this dream and about the sun and the moon and the stars. And Joseph was one of the 12 stars, he and his 11 brothers, the other 11 stars. And then all of a sudden they were worshiping him. Well, that's a story that says that the children of Israel were the stars. So a lot of people have eyes about this. They say, well, the woman is the church, or the woman is the nation of Israel, or the woman is Mary, the mother of Jesus. Well, I'm going to cheat. And I'm going to just say the woman represents God's people. I'm just going to cheat there because that kind of covers all three of them. I can see aspects of all of them. So I'm not going to be hard over and say, well, it has to be this or it has to be that. I'm going to say it's just representing God's people. Because what we see is that Satan chases the woman. The dragon chases the woman. Well, who does Satan chase? He chases God's people. So I'm going to just go with that one. Okay. So what have we got? I'm going to summarize the whole chapter, even the parts I didn't read. So there's a woman who gives birth to a child, and the child's going to end up being Jesus. And the dragon, that's Satan, tries to kill Jesus and loses. So Jesus goes to heaven and goes on his throne. So the dragon is upset, Satan is upset, so he oppresses God's people. That's basically what this is saying. And the key that we talked about in the last sermon, I don't have a lot of time to go back to, is this time and a half time, 3.5 times, 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,200 and I think 60 days, all refer to a period of time. Okay, so then what does Satan do? He gets upset and he goes off and makes war with the Christians. And then we found out that he lost, right? So now let's move into chapter 13. And we're going to get some more of these symbols that you've all have heard about. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him power and his throne and great authority. We could keep reading, but I've got to skip some. I just want to point out that a diadem is like a crown. So he's got these horns with crowns on them. Then at the end of the chapter, we'll see, then I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. And he makes the earth and those who dwell in it worship the first beast, with whose fatal wound was healed. And he performs great signs, so that even he makes fire come down from heaven to the earth, like the presence of men. Now again, these are symbols. This isn't reality. These are signs in heaven. And then I want to read this last part of Revelation 13. And he causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand and on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or to sell except the one who has a mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let he who understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. So he has told us these signs that represent other things. We know that the dragon represents Satan. We know that Jesus represents the child. So what are all of these symbols trying to tell us? And that's what we're going to try to decipher. And I'm sorry to tell you, we're not going to get it all sorted out this week. I'll tell you that if you want to know after the lesson, go read chapter 17, and it's going to start telling you more details to help you put the pieces together. But this beast has 10 horns and 10 crowns, and his 7 heads have blasphemous names on it, so it says bad things. And he's described as a leopard, a bear, and a lion. And the dragon, Satan, gives this beast authority. So who in the world is this beast? And the whole world is going to follow the beast. And again, we come up with this 42 months thing. And the beast says bad things and blasphemes God. He blasphemes his name, his people, and heaven. So who in the world is this beast? And everybody's like, well, this beast is going to come. This is crazy. Well, we can go see that this isn't the first time that we've seen beasts with horns and crowns and leopards and lions and all that kind of stuff. Go back to Daniel chapter 7. Everybody remembers Daniel in the lion's den, and everybody remembers Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the big statue, but those are just 2 of the stories. Daniel also has a bunch of visions, and people are like, oh, I'm just going to skip over that stuff. Well, all of these symbols that we just saw in Revelation, or a lot of them, straight out of Daniel. So when Daniel has his vision, he sees that a lion with the wings of an eagle comes, and then a bear eating ribs comes, and a leopard with 4 heads and wings, and a dreadful beast with 10 horns come. Now, if you go read the visions in Daniel, what you're going to see is, because he explains, like the big tall statue guy with the head of gold and all that, and he tells him, God tells Daniel to tell Babylon, you're the head of gold. The Medo-Persians are going to take you over, and after you, the Greeks are going to come, and then somebody else is going to come after that. Well, we know from history, because all that stuff's happened, that that was the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire. This is all stuff in history, because this has already happened. These prophecies have been fulfilled. So we know what this stuff is saying. We know that the Roman Empire took over all these the ground, all the land that these other empires had ever had. And we know from the Old Testament, when we go read Daniel, that when you see 10 horns, those are 10 kings, because that's what it says. And the king will speak out against God and the saints will be given to him for 3.5 times. Whoa, wait a second. You mean I'm seeing the same 42 months I'm seeing in Revelation is back here in Daniel chapter 7? Yeah, it's a key. Daniel, we understand most of what Daniel said because it's already happened in history. So we can take those keys from Daniel to unlock what he's saying in Revelation. Okay, so the beast in Revelation 13 is described like a leopard, bear, and a lion. Well, those beasts that the beast in Daniel chapter 7 devoured were a leopard, bear, and a lion. And I've already said that the Roman Empire took up all of the land that used to be the Babylonians, the Medes, the Greeks. Okay, the beast had 7 horns in Revelation 13. Well, the beast in Daniel chapter 7 has 10 horns. The beast had seven heads. Well, if you go back and you look at Daniel chapter 7, all those beasts together had 7 heads. And the beast blasphemes God. And in Daniel chapter 7, he speaks great boasts and speaks out against the Lord. Well, those are the same things. The same ways of description of the beast in Revelation 13 is from Daniel chapter 7. Well, history tells us that the beast in Daniel chapter 7 is the Roman Empire. So a lot of people, me included, think that the beast in Revelation is talking about the Roman Empire. We can discuss this afterwards if you have more questions or want to bring up points, because obviously I don't have time to tell you everything or all of my supporting information as to why I believe that. But I believe it because I find it in the scriptures, not because some other person told me to say it. So we can rattle off, well, the beast works for the devil. Well, the Roman Empire killed Jesus Christ. That's pretty much working for the devil. He blasphemes God. Well, the Romans were a bunch of pagan idol worshippers, right? That's blasphemy, right? He had authority over all the earth. And remember, in the Bible, when it says all the earth, it's not talking about the planet. It's talking about the land. So in the Roman world, in the time of the Bible, in the New Testament, Rome was in control of all of the known earth. That's as far as the people in the Holy Lands, all they knew was that area. And the Romans were in charge of all of it. And they called anybody that was outside of that land, they had one word for them. They called them barbarians. And I'm like, well, I don't think that's really nice to say that everybody who wasn't a Roman was a barbarian. But that's what they said. The Greeks were surely aware of the Indian subcontinent because actually Alexander the Great had gone farther than the Romans. But the Romans were just like, we don't care about that. We own the whole earth. So if somebody says they ruled the entire world, that was the world they cared about. Now, we all know that there's more of the globe, but they didn't care about that. They had a very self-centered way of looking at it, as it were. We already covered the act for 42 months as kind of a key time period to bring them together. He's going to fight Christians and persecute them. Well, the Romans got a pretty good rap they persecuted Christians quite a bit. So that lines up pretty good. The whole unfaithful world follows the beast and worships the dragon. Well, the Roman pantheon of gods they spread their Roman pagan religions all over the Mediterranean area. So I think these symbols pretty much peg that the beast is the Roman Empire. Now again, remember, this book is talking about things that are shortly to come to place. The Roman Empire was in charge when this book was written. But I want to give credit to others. Some people say, well, no, the beast is not the Roman Empire. It's the Antichrist. You're mistaken. It's not the Roman Empire. It's the Antichrist. And when they say the Antichrist, they take it as a title as to one individual or being that is the Antichrist. But that's not a view shared in Scripture. First John talks about the Antichrist. Second John talks about the Antichrist. And what does he say? Many Antichrists have appeared. Because an Antichrist is just anybody who denies Jesus. So was the Roman Empire an Antichrist? Yes. There's lots of Antichrists. We probably wouldn't have to go very far before we found someone here in Bellevue who said that they didn't believe Jesus was the Son of God. They're Antichrists. It's not one guy. It's anybody who says that Jesus isn't the Son of God. They're against Christ, against Jesus. That's all it means. Okay, so the second beast had two horns like a lamb, but spoke out as a dragon. He exercises the authority of the first beast. So who's this guy working for the first beast? He is the idol can speak and kill those who don't worship it. The second beast causes everyone to be given the mark of the beast, and no one can buy or sell stuff unless they have the mark of the beast. And then he gives us a clue. He says, hey, if you're smart, if you have wisdom, you'll understand that the mark of the beast is the number of the man, and it's 666 or 666. Whoa. So he's given us a clue. And we have to use these clues to figure out who he's talking about. Okay. So who is this false prophet? In Revelation 19, it'll call the second beast the false prophet. Now I want to tell you that most people in the Protestant world, when they hear about this second beast, they say it's the Pope. The Pope is the second beast. And that's because Protestant folks, they don't like Catholic people very much, or they don't like Catholic priests very much. So a lot of people throughout history have said that this second beast is the Pope. But I don't buy it. And I'll tell you why I don't buy it. I think it's pretty rude to say that the Pope. I mean, I don't believe the doctrine of the Pope, but I think it's pretty rude to call him the Antichrist, the second beast, one of the beast's henchmen. Well, I'm a nerd, so the way I'll explain this best is a map. The seven churches in Asia are over here, and you see that's kind of a blue color, and Rome is over here. The Roman Catholic Pope has never had influence over the area where the seven churches of Asia were. Those are Eastern Orthodox areas. If you keep going on to 600 AD, see, Eastern Orthodox churches ruled here. So I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to say that this prophecy is about the Pope when the people in the seven churches of Asia were never affected by the Pope, because the Pope never had influence over the area where the seven churches of Asia are. To this day, back in 1054 AD, the ruler of the Eastern Orthodox Church excommunicated the Pope, and the Pope excommunicated him, and they don't get along well. But if you know your history, what you'll find is there's thousands and millions of Eastern Orthodox Christians who've never been Catholic. And then, of course, we in the Western European world focus on Catholicism because that's our tradition is America was first populated by Western Europeans. So we talk more about the Pope. But Eastern Europe, they've never been under the Pope. So why in the world would this prophecy be about this second beast, this land beast, be about the Pope? They didn't know anything about the Pope. They'd never know anything about the Pope. And I'm looking at my time and I need to go quicker. So I'm going to skip these slides, but basically I have bullet points saying, I think it's rude to say the Pope is the second beast. So who is he? So let's look at what it says and kind of figure out who it might be. And I don't actually have an answer for you. The second beast gives everybody the mark of the beast. And if you get the mark of unless you have the mark of the beast, you can't buy or sell stuff. He has two horns like a lamb, but speaks like a dragon. So lambs don't have horns. So what does all that mean? But Jesus Christ is our lamb. And later on, he's called a false prophet. So I'm thinking that this false prophet must be someone who claims to either be a Christian or a Jew or both, but actually works for the Romans. Because the beast, if the beast is the Romans, and this second beast works for the first beast, but he says he's a lamb, it sounds like he's working for the Romans. So who might this be? Who in history said they were Jewish, claimed to be Jewish, but was actually working for the Romans? A possible candidate. Now, I'm not saying it has to be this guy, but it could be. Herod Agrippa II. This is the guy in Acts chapter 25 and 26. This is the Agrippa that Paul goes and talks to. He feigns to be a Jewish person. He says, oh, I'm Jewish, but no, he was raised in Rome. He was no more Jewish than I am. But he claimed to be so that he could get the people, the Judean people, the Jewish people, to follow him. But he was just as much as Roman as anybody. So it could be this guy. It could be a lot of other people. But again, I'm looking at my time. I don't have a firm answer. Um, but well, I'm going to move on for the sake of time. Now we get into the good stuff, the mark of the beast. Because everybody talks about the mark of the beast. Oh, the mark of the beast, the mark of the beast. And yes, I've had too much caffeine this morning. The mark of the beast, what is it? The first thing to realize is, again, it's a symbolic book. It's not literal. We're not going to have giant grasshoppers come down and destroy us all and sting us like scorpions. It's a symbolic book. Don't look at this literally. We're not actually going to get tattoos on our forehead or our wrists. But the book was meant to be understood by the people of the day. So that means if you think the mark of the beast is Bitcoin, I'm sorry. The people in what is modern day Turkey 2,000 years ago, the 7 churches of Asia, had no idea what Bitcoin was. So it's not Bitcoin. It's not credit cards. It's not your social security number. So that was a big one. When the government came out with social security numbers, people are like, oh, that's the mark of the beast. It's like, no, it's not. Facebook accounts. That's another one here. 20 years ago when Facebook was launching, there were people who claimed to be Christians saying that Facebook accounts were the mark of the beast. Nah. Okay, so let's look at 3 options, and you can kind of figure out which one I think is right, but I'll throw them all out there. Okay, so there's a theory that says that when people would go to open our markets, there would be guards at the entrance to the market, and they would say, you need to burn some incense to the Roman gods in order to enter the market. So they would burn some incense, and they'd take some of the incense, and they'd put it on their foreheads. And that was the mark of the beast. Well, the problem is that I can find no first-hand account, no historical data to back that up. Could be true, but the only person that I've heard say this is a bunch of preachers in the 19th and 20th century. There's nothing going back 2,000 years where some old historian guy wrote that down. Okay. The second option, another good option, is that you had to have a piece of paper that said you were a good pagan worshiping the Roman gods in order to do business. Now, there is some data for this one. Domitian started persecuting Christians in the late 80s AD, and he would require people to call him Lord God. And there was evidence that people that were suspected of being Christians would be put before an inquisition. And Pliny the Younger, this guy is awful. He is just awful. And he writes a letter. He's like, I don't know what to do. I get these people that are suspected Christians, and basically what I do is I torture them to death unless they say they're not Christians. And it's fully recorded in history. And the emperor writes him back and says, if they say they're not Christians, then just let them go. But of course, if they say they're Christians, you got to torture them to death. And this is recorded in history. You can go read these books from the first-hand accounts of this happening. So that's one idea, is you had to have your piece of paper to say you weren't a Christian. The third option, we talked about it a little bit this morning in the lesson, that Jesus turned over the table of the money changers. I'm looking at my time and I'm like, oh man, I'm running out of time. But y'all are in for. I'm just gonna keep going. In the Old Testament, there were all of these tithes and ceremonies and taxes that you had to pay to be a good Jew. Okay. In Jesus' time, in the 1st century, the Romans were ruling over Judea. So if you're in Judea and you're living there, what kind of money do you use? We use Roman money. In America, what kind of money we use? We use American money. Go across the border into Canada, we use Canadian money. Go to Europe, we use euros. Well, the Judeans didn't like that at all. They didn't like using Roman money. They didn't like using Roman money because, like, you pull out a Roman coin, it's got some guy's face on it. And they thought that was imagery, that was an idol. So they said, well, we go back to the book of Deuteronomy, and it says, don't have any graven images with people's faces on it. So we can't be using this Roman money. Well, of course you had to use Roman money. It was the only kind of money they had. Oh, no, no, no. Herod, that guy that we were talking about a few minutes ago, he convinced the Romans, well, let me mint my own coins, our coins, to use here in Judea, and we won't have Roman faces on it. So they did. You can go find them. You can buy them on eBay if you want. But now, if you went to the temple, you couldn't use these Roman coins to pay your temple tax. So you had to go to a money changer. Now, how many of y'all know when you travel, never to change your money in the airport because you pay a huge amount of, a huge percentage off of it, right? It's a racket. You don't want to do that. Uh, well, that's what they had to do. They would take their Jewish money to the temple, and these money changers would sell them some Jewish money, and they would charge a premium for it. Now, I could go on and on. I'll just go ahead and show you the pictures. This was a racket. This was a total racket. See, because the money changers would sell you some Jewish money, and then you'd go put the Jewish money in the collection, and then that money went to the priests, right? Well, what are the priests going to do with all this Jewish money? Because they wanted to use Roman money. Well, they'd sell it back to the money changers. So the Jewish guys get paid. They take a cut, a percentage, and then they go back to the money changer guy, who also takes a percentage. So this is just a racket. So Jesus was upset at these guys because they had a racket of taking 10% here, 10% there, 10% there, abusing people trying to support the collection. That's like if we took up a collection here, and then the guy who took up the plate took a cut off of it. And then they're like, well, you got to give more money because we're not paying all the bills. Why? Well, because I took a cut, and he took a cut, and he took a cut. So that's why Jesus got upset. So if you go look, here's some examples. Here's some Jewish money, and they'll put it usually had wheat or some symbol on it, but not a person's face. Roman money, almost every Roman coin's got somebody's face on it. It's like the first thing you do when you become emperor is mint a coin with your face on it. You can go look this up. You can go to tons of websites for coin collectors that talk about this. You don't have to go to some church website. But this is how it worked. Okay. Coming back in. So this theory, again, it's just a theory. I can't tell you this is absolutely the way it is. The mark of the beast represents Roman coins that contain the emperor's face. And what the prophecy is that there's not going to be any more Jewish money because the Romans are going to come in and destroy these Jewish people. And you're going to be forced to use the Roman money because that's the only kind of money that's going to be good anymore. That's the prophecy. That's the theory of what this mark of the beast is telling them. Because remember, the book of Revelation is telling them about things that are about to happen. So that's option 3. Now, it could be something else. But if you don't think it's one of these, if you come up with something else, it has to be something that the people in that day would have understood. It would have been something they would have had to figure out from what the book of Revelation said. And then you'd have to be like, okay, well, it's this. Well, why is it that? It has to be something that's usable to them. So you can't say it's Bitcoin. You can't say it's Social Security number. It's something that applied to them back then. Okay. Now we're coming down to the end. Here's wisdom. Let he who understands calculate the number of the beast, for the number of the man, and his number is 666. The number represents a man, and his number is 666. That's what we're going to get to next time. Next time, we're going to cover 666, Armageddon, and the 7 bowls of wrath. Now, we'll give you a little bit of hint if you want to go do some studying. You guys are familiar with numerology, gematria. And you're like, what in the world is that? Well, when people take numbers and make them into people's names, that's called gematria. And you've heard of all of that because every TV show you've ever watched at the end of it has Roman letters at the bottom to tell you when the movie was made, right? When you go to some building in downtown whatever city, there's always Roman numerals on a building that represent when the building was built, right? So Roman numerals are a form of this lettering. So that's your clue. If you want to go figure out who 666 is, you can go look at Roman numerals and figure it out. And I'll tell you it's harder than that, but that's what we're going to discuss next time. Okay, but let's get back into what's more applicable for us. A study of Revelation is really to understand what this message in the Bible was to the people in the first century, to the seven churches of Asia. And we can't let that message distract us from the whole message of the New Testament, the message of the gospel. And I'd like to go to Hebrews chapter 3. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. So regardless of what you think about Revelation, you need to think about yourself. And today is the day that you can turn yourself back to the Lord. Today is the day where you can say, you know, I'm going to stop doing that. I'm not going to be distracted by sin anymore. I'm going to focus on the Lord. Moving on to verse 15. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion. Stop being rebellious and submit yourself to God. So in the churches of Christ, we have a tradition. It's a tradition. It's not a requirement. It's like you don't look at the playbook in the Bible, but it's our tradition to say we want to offer everybody an opportunity every week to give themselves to God, to come forward and say, I want to become a Christian. And we also want to give people an opportunity to say, hey, look, I need the prayers of this congregation. So the tradition has been for a couple hundred years now is to stand, the whole congregation, to stand at the ready and ask, does anyone need the prayers of the congregation? And we do this by saying, we're going to come together and we're going to stand and we're going to sing a song of invitation. And that song of invitation is to invite you to come to ask for the prayers of the saints or to say, I want to be a Christian. So that's what we're going to do at the close of this sermon is we're going to stand and sing the invitation song and invite anyone who has the needs of the congregation to come forward.